last few days. Really happy to see everyone here with us tonight. Appreciate it. Hello, Lisa. Hello, Sarah and Rebecca. Welcome. Tom and Shelly, thanks for being here. Welcome to Valerie. Hello to Jesse and Jana. Great to have you with us. Thanks for being here. If you're just coming in, folks, we're going to get started. Apologies for the delay. Thanks for bearing with us. Feel free to drop in the chat where you're zooming in from, what you've been up to on this summer Sunday, the last day of July. I don't know how it goes by so fast. It's crazy to think that August starts very soon. Welcome to Vicky and Valerie. Thanks for being here. Shauna, I see you. Welcome. Aliana, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Got some friends from Cape Cod joining us. That's great. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Apologies for some of the technical difficulties earlier, folks. If you have a friend who's supposed to be here tonight and you're not seeing them, if you could do us a favor, we've posted a link in the chat that's the correct link to this specific webinar. Thanks for helping us out. Thanks for rolling with the punches on this one. Welcome to Brenda and Carolyn. Thanks for being here. Hello, Josh. Great to have you with us. Marilyn, thanks for being here. Patty, welcome. Apologies for some of the technical difficulties earlier, folks. Steffi, if you have a friend for being here, thanks so much for joining us. If you're just joining us, thanks for bearing with some of the technical difficulties. We should have that figured out. If you have a friend that you know is interested in being here tonight, but maybe you don't see them here, we've just posted a link from our friend Martha in the chat. That's the correct link to this Zoom meeting. Feel free to send that on to them. We appreciate it. And if you're just joining as well, we'd love for you to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're zooming in from, how your day's been, what you got up to this weekend, good books you're reading, all that stuff. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to Carrie and Kelly. Welcome to Brenda and Caroline. Great to have you with us. Councilor Willie, I see you in the chat, representing Somerville. Thanks for being here. We're going to give folks one more minute, and then we will kick off. We have a really great panel of speakers here with us today, subject matter experts, practitioners, people who are doing the work of creating real alternative emergency response programs. Really excited to have them with us today. Welcome to Charlotte. Welcome to Anne. Thanks so much for being here. Welcome to Robert. Thanks, Robert. We're posting some links in the chat. If you've got a friend that you know wants to be here tonight, but you don't see them, this is the correct link in the chat. Thanks for bearing with some technical difficulties earlier. We've got great numbers here tonight. Awesome to see. Folks, continue to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're from, what you're excited about tonight. Great things you've been up to this weekend. It is 7:15 on the East Coast, and I think that's well past time for us to get things started. So let's get things started. First, hello. My name's Cameron Wells. I use the he, him, his pronouns, and I am your MC and facilitator / moderator tonight. I am a member of an organization called SURGE, and specifically the Boston chapter. That stands for Showing Up for Racial Justice. SURGE is an organization dedicated to the political organizing of and radicalization of white people. And I'm showing up here today in my capacity supporting our Heart Cambridge organization, which you'll get to hear plenty more about later tonight. So thanks all for having me. I'm really excited. It's been really enjoyable to be part of the planning process for this, and just know that we've got some great content and great conversations happening. So thank you so much for spending your Sunday evenings with us. I'm going to talk a little bit, if we jump to our next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about our general purpose tonight before we hear an invocation from our friend Chris Spears. You may all know this, but our purpose tonight is to hear from a range of individuals, our panel speakers, who, like I mentioned, are making alternative response programs a reality in their cities and communities. Our guests, Earl, Sean, Barbara, and Stephanie as well, will have a chance in a few slides to speak about their work and their experience in their communities. Each of them will get a few minutes to talk to us about their experiences, but we're hoping that the bulk of tonight will be for a Q&A session, which we want you to be participating in. We've got a set of questions collected already that we'll likely be starting with, but a couple of housekeeping reminders. I'm sure at this point we're all expert Zoomers, given the necessities of the last few years. But a few things to remind you. You should all be muted, and this session will be recorded. So in case you have to duck out or have to miss something, that you'd like to hear me ask them. I'm going to specifically turn you to the Q&A button that should be at the bottom of your Zoom screens. So that's a different function than the chat itself. And by putting your questions there, that'll ensure that our background tech support will see those questions and be able to feed them to me so that we get a response from our panelists. So just a reminder, if you have questions that you'd like to ask of our panel speakers later on in the presentation, be sure to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. With that, thanks for your patience. I'm pleased to pass things over to Chris Spears of Our Revolution Blue Hills for a brief invocation before we get into tonight's content. Chris, take it away.
Okay, thank you. We recognize that we meet this evening on lands taken from Indigenous people. We affirm our solidarity with Indigenous peoples, such as the Anishinaabe collection of North American tribes, as well as our more local brothers and sisters, tribes such as the Masachusetts, Mashpee, Pecumtuck, Wampanoag, and Narragansett peoples. We recognize that we live within the American capitalist system founded on slavery, a system that established a legacy of violence and selfish acquisition that includes mass shootings, racism, sexism, homophobia, support of oppressive foreign governments, and economic inequality. We stand with the working class and their rights to dignity, a living wage, competitive benefits, and robust and affordable health care. Through forums like this one, we endeavor to educate the public on these complex issues by finding constructive solutions regarding a new way forward.
Thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate that. I'm going
And
to turn things over briefly to Hal Ginsburg, National Coordinator of Our Revolution. Hal, take it away.
all right, Cameron, thank you so much. I'll be very, very brief, and I do want to apologize. I was the one who used the wrong link, so glad we've got a good number on this call, and we will be posting on social media, so please share it afterwards so folks can see these great, great speakers on a crucial topic. Real quick, what we're doing in Our Revolution, we're fighting big tech. This is a huge part of the problem that we're confronting across our nation, including what we're discussing today, problems with policing. You can go to ourrev.us/stop big tech, tell Chuck Schumer, regulate big tech. We're also working on keeping insurgents like Donald Trump off the ballot in 2024, and perhaps even more importantly this year, many people who were involved after having taken the oath of office in that January 6th insurrection, such as Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania. Email defenddemocracy@ourrevolution.com if you want to get involved in that campaign. We are also urging you, please help us elect great progressives, great labor supporters like Andy Levin. We are phone banking tomorrow, ourrev.us/phonebank. And I'll put those links in the chat. But that's going to do it for me. Let's go over, well, just real quick. Yeah, if you want to become a movement builder and show your support for Our Revolution, help us continue our campaigns, ourrev.us/MEM, M-A for Massachusetts, MEM. And now let me go to Our Revolution Massachusetts co-chair, Martha Karcher. Martha.
Good evening, everyone. Briefly, Our Revolution Massachusetts is organizing a grassroots political revolution to challenge power and to prioritize the needs of all people and our planet. We are building a statewide movement by fighting for economic, racial, social, sexual, gender, and environmental justice for all. We have local chapters around the state and a very active statewide organization. Statewide priorities include climate justice, Green New Deal, Medicare for all, gig workers protection, tax the rich, redistribute wealth, gender rights, and housing as a right. In addition to grassroots organizing, we work to elect progressive champions. To join us or contribute, see the links in the chat. And now I'm happy to turn the meeting over to Jackie from DSA.
Hey folks, the Democratic Socialist of America is the largest socialist organization in the United States with over 92,000 members and chapters all across the US. We're a political and activist organization, not a party, through campus and local chapters. DSA members use a variety of tactics, from legislative to direct action, to fight for reforms that empower working people. We believe that working people should run both the economy and society democratically to meet human needs, not make profits for a few. If you're interested in checking out your local chapter, we'll be dropping links into the chat. And back to you, Cameron.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Martha. Thanks, Hal. Folks, I'm really excited to introduce Stephanie Guirand, who's going to help frame the issue for us before we hear from our remaining panel of speakers. A little bit about Stephanie. She's currently a senior researcher at Cambridge Heart and is a founding member of the Black Response Cambridge. And somehow in all of that, she's also a sociology PhD candidate. We'll hear more specifically about the mission of Cambridge Heart a little later on. But Stephanie, what are some of the things we should be keeping in mind about this issue as a whole, and maybe as an introduction into what we're going to hear from our panelists?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So excited for this conversation. Well, you're all here because cities and towns across Massachusetts are engaging in discussions about alternatives to public safety, alternatives to public health, intersections of both. But what are alternatives, and what does it mean to be an alternative? Alternative to what? And how will we house these alternative programs? Will they be embedded in city departments? Will they be nonprofit organizations? Will they be public-private partnerships or fully autonomous organizations, or any combinations of these four options so far? And how will these programs be funded? How will these programs be held accountable? Of course, there's the deep question of what will these programs even do, right? Will they be addressing the circumstances and concerns regarding trespassers, and will they be addressing interpersonal conflict? Will they support folks with their mutual aid needs? Will they help people with mental health needs? What are the potential calls that these alternatives are planning to take away from existing institutions and systems? And who will these programs serve? And how will they serve them? Will they serve unhoused community members, undocumented community members, formerly incarcerated, those working in informal economies? These are crucial questions that form the foundation of what the alternatives movement in Massachusetts and across the country are asking and engaging with. Here we are in this very strange moment, having to navigate the creation of these alternative public safety programs across Massachusetts, in a moment when the federal government has decided to launch a new initiative for behavioral health. There's this new line called where you can dial 988, similarly to 911. For whatever reason and however it's being rolled out, we're all having to discuss in Massachusetts what it will be, how will tie into the rollout of 988, who will be the mobile crisis response teams, the logistics and the complexities of tying into the infrastructure of receiving calls with a complex social and physical health and insurance infrastructure that is already lacking. Who will pay for these things? How will it work? We have a lot of questions as we seek to create our own alternative public safety programs on the local level. But there are other really crucial questions that we need to ask ourselves. Who will staff these programs? And how will they be trained? And who will be doing the training? And who we decide impact the decades of harms of the war on drugs? Will Massachusetts cities and towns come together to standardize the education of the folks who will staff these alternative public safety programs? And what is the curricula and who decides? And who will fund the education of community members to staff these programs? And of course, what is the future of alternatives? Do we have a future? Is this a momentary trend that will go unfunded? What will this conversation look like in 5, 10, 15 years? Conversations about alternatives are broad and robust without the necessity to juxtapose them to policing. And I've only scratched the surface of the conversations that we can have between us about the challenges of creating and implementing these programs. So tonight, we're asking you all to engage with us in the challenges of what it means to create, to implement, to challenge and build an alternative movement in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And as you engage in this discussion and you hear all of what the panelists have to offer and the complexities of everything we're doing today, I ask you to figure out your role. Think through what it is that you'll do to help advocate for the allocation of resources, calls, and of course, to ensure a future for these programs. That is my frame. I pass it back to you, Cameron.
Stephanie, thanks so much. I'm feeling both kind of awed by the number of questions and things we have to figure out about this world of alternative or complementary emergency response, but also really charged and excited that we've got a group of people here who are all interested in trying to find answers to those questions. Thanks so much for framing them. Folks, finally, thanks for your patience. We're going to transition to hearing some words and remarks from our panel of speakers. It gives me great joy to introduce our first, Earl Miller of Amherst, Massachusetts. I'm going to tell you a few things that you should know about Earl, and then Earl, you'll have a chance to correct anything that I got wrong, or tell the people more things about yourself and your work. Earl is a native of Western Massachusetts, and he's the first director of Amherst's Community Responders for Equity, Safety, and Service, or CRESS. It's an organization within the Amherst local government, providing civilian unarmed alternatives that provide community safety services that would otherwise require police. Earl, we're so happy to have you with us tonight. Over to you. What things should the people know about you and your work?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I always get the Western Mass credit, but I always like to say I'm a Holyoke Project kid. I don't know how I ended up here, but I'm glad to be here. So CRESS is the fourth public safety department in Amherst. We are a freestanding public safety department. We work with the police and fire department as peers, which is an approach. Our thought really is we are attempting to do this as much as possible without half measures, and that may ultimately be a poison pill, but we believe in it and we're trying it. Where we are right now, we have 8 responders. We are a multiracial minority majority team who are about to start their 5th week of training. They only have 8 weeks, so by September 6th, they will be taking 911 calls in town. We will be taking everything from noise complaints to nonviolent disputes between folks. We will be showing up to work with folks who are homeless and dealing with mental health challenges, in addition to the capacity that we're building to do preventative work. Ultimately, I think we all have to come to some sort of agreement that a 911 call represents some sort of societal breakdown, and that if we continue to address problems from a standpoint of how 911 calls work, we're going to really miss the opportunity to get upstream. We made a decision with our folks that we prioritize lived experience to the same degree as educational experience. All of our responders are paid the same. The budget for CRESS. So we're somewhere around 900,000. I'm not good with math, so if I'm off by a lot, my bad. Most of our budget, our salaries, come from the town budget. Part of what we've started to say is that we're building an institution, not a thing that's going to be here for a couple weeks. So the town is invested. Our folks are union. They are in the SIEU. They will have a pension at the end of this if they decide to stick around with us. It was really meaningful for us that they have the same employment opportunities as everyone else in public safety. Every trainer we brought in has had lived experience in the topic they were training on, including motivational interviewing. We had 2 trainings from the Wildflower Alliance on hearing voices and having conversations around suicide with folks who are living in that. They'll start nonviolent communication this week. We really are focused on that. I will try not to get too into answering the questions in the chat, but this one is a good one. The town did not, they did not pull funding from the police to create us. Part of that was an intentional piece, really kind of around, we want to work together, and it would be hard for us to work together in that scenario. But also it was just a decision the town made. And really, we are a bit of a top-down. One of the questions that hasn't been asked that I think is interesting is who is giving folks the authority to do their work. Ours are our town councilors. Our legislative branch has made a decision that we will exist, that we will take 911s by mandate. So that's kind of the world we operate in. I don't want to take up too much time. The thing I'm really the thing I'm most optimistic about is that we're starting to get to the work. And I appreciate these conversations. I like having them. But we have been talking as a country for a very, very long time. And it seems to be just about time to do something. And September 6th in Amherst, we will be doing it for better or worse. We will not be perfect. We will not be infallible, but we will learn from those mistakes. And for the folks who are here thinking about their communities joining us in this great experiment, the more of us who are making these mistakes together, the better we can all get. And it doesn't have to be a competition. It isn't a competition between police departments. They are not, battling each other for limited budgets. They kind of have a pathway forward. And, I would encourage folks to think about us the same. You're going to see very different approaches tonight. And in Amherst, what I'll say is we are excited. And if the approach we take does not turn out to be the right one, we are excited and eager for the opportunity to change direction and follow folks. This is the work. There's a lot of How has it identified how they will measure your success? The same way every other public safety department gets identified. Give us 5 years. I don't even know what we'll look like for the next 5. We're looking at amount of 911 calls we take, but most importantly, we're looking at the folks who felt like public safety was not an option for them and who have historically felt like that wasn't true, for them to feel like they have a public safety department that they can engage with, that will provide them the things they're looking for. I think with all of this stuff, we can get so deep into data, but it's important to remember that we are starting with limited amount of folks. We are going to get limited data sets back. And that ultimately, when we started police and fire, despite it being 100 years ago, they didn't count the amount of fires they put out, or they didn't count the amount of people they stopped from doing crime. It was a feeling thing. So give us a chance to see the feeling folks in our community get. And ultimately, that's the thing that's most important to us. Does our town feel safer? Does it feel safe for people it didn't feel safe for before? Thank you.
Earl, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here and your perspective. Hey, folks, just a quick reminder. The best way to get your questions answered is not through the chat. Please instead put them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. That's what's going to be most fair for other panelists and for our attendees tonight. So again, please direct your questions to the Q&A section, and I'll try to get to as many as possible. Next up, we're really excited to have Barbara Ortiz of Cambridge Heart. A little about Barbara. She is a responder at Heart Cambridge and has a background in early childhood education and anti-racist curriculum. She's also a nationally registered EMT and a certified medical interpreter in English and Spanish. Barbara, thanks for being here tonight. What should the people know about you and your work in Heart?
Thank you, thank you. Well, Heart, first, Heart stands for Holistic Emergency Alternative Response Team. And we are a community safety program that responds to public and private crises and engaging in conflict resolution, coordinating material and mutual aid, and it's grounded in transformative and disability justice principles. So Heart was developed by the community of people who were underserved by the existing system. And Heart has been designed to serve the most marginalized populations in Cambridge. Basically, we believe that all people deserve appropriate, accessible, and support for their wellness right there when they need it, without the barriers of language or filling out papers or online applications. Emergency responders who are trained to use empathy, active listening, trauma-informed practices, and nonviolent communication can help de-escalate and resolve also mental health emergencies. The Heart responders, and we also have 8 right now, they are uniquely qualified because they are from the community. And we know what people are going through because we've been there ourselves. They have insights that other folks don't have around how the systems are working and how certain services are actually harming when they claim to be supposed to be helping the person or situation. So we've had a lot of trainings. We're still in training. And those trainings are included like EMT. The whole cohort took EMT training. That's where I got my national registry certification. We are about to go into certified peer specialist training with Kiva. We've also had training with Welfare Alliance as well around trauma-informed care, and with MAP, the Material Aid and Advocacy Program here in Cambridge that serves unhoused community members, as well as training with Mental Health First and a whole lot of other organizations that are aligned with our values. We will be working independently of law enforcement. The fact is that the presence of armed police often escalates already volatile mental health situations, especially for Brown and Black folks. And so we are there as an alternative to try to reduce harm to folks who are already in crisis, further harm. Yes, so we will be answering calls for, like I mentioned before, mental health crisis, suicide prevention, an assessment, conflict resolution, grief and loss, pretty much anything short of what we'd call criminal, activity, anything around this, any mental health situation or community crisis where people are afraid of just having somebody show up and take somebody away or make the situation worse. Yeah, I don't want to go over my time, but that's kind of the gist of it. I will drop a video in the chat for if folks want to watch it later. Thank you.
Barbara, thank you so much. And I recommend checking out that video, folks, that Barbara shares. It's a great one and has lots of great info on Heart Cambridge. All right, our last but certainly not the least of our panelists is Sean Donovan of Northampton. A little bit about Sean. In December of 2021, he was named the first implementation director of the Department of Community Care, part of the Mayor's Office of Northampton. Before that, he spent nearly 10 years at the Wildflower Alliance organization in Holyoke. He's a Northampton resident and is helping to build the first organization within Northampton city government to respond to mental substance and social crises as an alternative to police. Sean, thanks for being here. What should the people know about you and the work you're doing?
Thanks, Cameron. I guess I feel like just having a big exhale because I'm sure a lot of us are holding so much. I know talking to Stephanie and Earl and other people that we're holding a lot. And so I just want to acknowledge that. I'm someone that enters this work as a person who's been in the psych system, who struggles with suicidal thoughts a fair bit. It's been labeled with psychiatric labels. And I share that because I've been struggling lately. Part of it is based on, the greater world. Some of it is based on the immense work that I'm tasked with. And I'm sure a lot of y'all are in these roles where we have to kind of show up even with even more integrity than the status quo. And I just want to acknowledge that. So when people ask us about how are you evaluating, your efficacy, I appreciate what you said, Earl, about we're going to do the best we can and we're going to learn from what's not working. I know in Northampton, we're actually working also with the UMass Amherst Center for Program Evaluation to help us, collaboratively design some metrics for evaluating our success too. And I think that's also going to be helpful because I think it is a game of legitimacy too, saying how can we prove our metrics? And I know I've been talking with other people throughout the state about that. Yeah, so I want to acknowledge too that hope I can speak for other people here too, the three of us that represent these bigger programs that we're working towards, even though they're in different contexts, they're unique in that they respond separately. Even if they're in the city, if they're outside, we're not co-response, or at least I'll say for me, our program is not co-response. That is a model that's pretty, well-funded, but not often as utilized as it could be. And maybe, there's a lot of debate around what co-response is, and what it's useful for, which means a mental health worker going in tandem with police officers. I think one of the issues, I don't want to discredit the people that do that work. There's a lot of amazing people that do. But if people have trauma with law enforcement or power over or sort of coercive social services, that can bring all of that to the situation and create a baseline of escalation. So I'm really proud that even though it's tough, all of us are trying to figure out how to have an independent team, even if it's part of the 911 system, to respond. In Northampton, we are actually in between public health and public safety, which is unique. And sort of Earl was saying, we're figuring out an experiment here, right? So I think that gives us some sort of buy-in to ideas about prevention and thinking about how we're using elements of harm reduction in our work that is already part of the public health framework. And in Northampton, we have a team called DART that already does more co-response based work with police. And we're actually trying to create a separate team, which has the support of our public safety team. and really came from demands from our greater community, particularly folks that were impacted by policing because of their racial identities, their disabilities, being queer and trans and immigrants. And so we're trying to hold all this as we're developing this. One thing I do want to say, like, we're not yet into the training phase as Hart and Cress are, so I'm so excited for both of you. One thing we did do, though, we had an initial workshop back in July that I did in tandem with someone from Wildflower, Caroline. It was called Beyond De-Escalation, Moving Towards Connection and Co-Regulation. And I'm sharing a bit from this because I think it's relevant to a lot of the work that I'm seeing ahead of me. So many people have been asking me in this role, like, how do we de-escalate? I'm not sure if people are hearing that in your communities, but my follow-up is always like, what do you mean by that? Like, what are you struggling with? And so sometimes this idea of de-escalation, I feel like it comes from like war terminology, and it doesn't always belong. And so in the context of our workshop Beyond De-Escalation, we were trying to get at, how do people connect with other folks in really challenging moments? There's so much of a
We will
threshold
not be
between
perfect.
like
We will
completely
not.
safe and completely violent that people can work within to support people through moments, whether it's about distress or disputes of space. And so one thing I'm helping to do, or at least I hope so, is while we're making these institutional changes within our public safety framework, we're also trying to offer opportunities for cultural shifts too. Because oftentimes, you know, law enforcement is instigated by citizens who are calling about other people. And oftentimes that, you know, has bias based on race, ability, people being judged for how they're dealing with housing insecurity. And that has impacts on how people can get the best support. You know, so our program at Northampton is really trying to figure out, similarly to others, you know, how can we really be in relationships with people differently? How can we look at on the ground community mediation? And quite frankly, like, how can we break down what it means to talk about mental health challenges? Like, what does that even mean, right? For me, it hides a lot of the situations because context matters. And so if we can bring people that have their own lived experience, not just in some of the struggles people experience, but in the community that they're in, there's already a baseline of perhaps de-escalation, but that comes with the practice of creating relationships. And one last thing I'll say, I was really excited for this initial training through our department, though we haven't hired other people, because it was bringing together people from drop-in centers, harm reductionists, people that worked at the public library, some of our health inspectors who are some of my coworkers, and people working as recovery coaches to really say, like, what common values can we talk about when we're dealing with overwhelming moments? And I really hope that, you know, we will have a really effective like first responder team that we're going to start hiring for this fall. But on the other side of things, I really hope that we just have more people in our community that have the skills and willingness to show up for each other. Because honestly, like, first response isn't going to work for people all the time because of their past traumas and because, you know, maybe they're not available in these moments. And so I've talked a lot with people in Northampton about how can neighbors support each other in their own context if that's not where the distress is coming from. And so, yeah, I don't want to talk too much longer, but I just wanted to outline that, you know, we're in the beginning stages in some ways, but we are going to have some public events in Northampton that's called the Resilient Community Series, our first one being August 24th. Working on the promotion for that. It's really hard to juggle all these things, but part of that is to bring people into the conversations we're having about public health inequities, about hearing voices movement, about safe consumption spaces, you know, things that even go beyond first response that can help our community, you know, feel more resilient rather than expecting people to be resilient. So thank you.
Sean, thank you so much. And thanks for being here. And thanks for that realness check too. This work would be hard in any kind of context. And I think it's especially hard in the current world that we're living in. Thanks for reminding us for that and for that breath check. I really appreciated that. Folks, I'm going to make a little bit of a pivot here before we open up to Q&A with our panelists. Just want to give you some quick links and resources that give you ways to connect more with this kind of work and support some of the work from either DSA or Our Revolution. You may not be able to click directly into these links, but they'll be dropped in the chat. we've got an Action Network link first. If you're interested just generally in trying to get alternative response programs or work happening in your community, wherever that might be, add your name and information to the form that goes through that link, and you'll be followed up with in an appropriate manner. We also want to spotlight an opportunity to support the ACES bill. ACES is a bill currently in Massachusetts State Legislature that, if passed, would reserve additional funding for alternative emergency response programs and related programs. I think if we click on the next slide, a few other opportunities more directly linked to DSA and Our Revolution. If you're interested in getting involved in local chapters, donating, these organizations run almost exclusively on donations. I know that they would love and appreciate your support, either through direct involvement or through some financial support as well. You'll have a chance to access these links after this presentation and in our chat, so I won't dwell too much time on them, and instead would love to transition to our open Q&A session. So again, we've got our panelists, Sean, Earl, Barbara here, Stephanie as well, obviously very familiar with the work of Hart Cambridge. And we're really lucky to have them as people who are subject matter experts, but maybe more importantly are, like Earl was saying, are doing the work, trying to get their hands dirty, trying to figure out how to make this stuff a reality. I'd like to open with a question that I'm getting some vibes in the chat from, and it looks like in whatever organization folks may have been in, there had to be some discussion or thinking through of like, where's my team, in whatever state it currently is, where's my team gonna sit? Am I gonna be part of a city government? Am I gonna be a co-response program? And I'm gonna be grassroots and work completely independently? I wonder if any of our panelists could speak to like, what was your individual thought process, even just for yourself, as to that helped you define like, oh, the specific slot that I feel like I want to push forward in looks like this and has these kinds of relationships. Maybe Earl, could you speak to that? I'd love to know your thinking on that question. How did that develop for you?
Yeah, so I like working for government. Before I came here, I worked for the Commonwealth at the Department of Mental Health. And so for me, it was important to, on a personal level, I have children. I hope I live long enough to retire someday. I'd like to not spend all of that needing to struggle to figure it out. But I also thought, and this is kind of a two-piece question, we made a decision about the type of people we were going to hire, which was people who had been through challenging situations in our community. And that often meant people who would never have had the opportunity to access a pension or, a middle-class wage through other ways. So for me, it was the permanency of it. Amherst is older than the country. That meant something to me. And I also just want to say, for me, the history of Amherst in terms of racial justice mattered a whole bunch. There were 20 Black men from Amherst who walked off to the Civil War. Some of them were in Galveston when the Juneteenth Proclamation was read. So I also wanted to go to a place where there was a high bar from our community. And I don't know many communities that have higher expectations than mine.
Got it. So that context is so important. And I like what you said, Earl, about also using this as a way to create ways for people to come into the organization, come into the work that maybe wouldn't have had a chance to receive those same kind of benefits if not for this department. Appreciate that. Sean, I see your hand raised. What are your thoughts? How did this develop for you?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I will say that there was a big community push for changes in our city in Northampton, much like there was across the world because of the uprisings for Black lives, and a lot of recognition that our public health and public safety structures aren't working for a lot of people. And so when that got put onto a commission to evaluate policing and move forward, they had recommended this Department of Community Care for the city, and for a couple of reasons. We felt like, or they felt like, I should say, that rather than outsource to a mental health nonprofit, who many community members had spoken about their distrust of some of those groups, it should be within the city to develop it, and also to have more funding stability. That was another rationale. But I will say, one thing that we're working on we're now part of the Department of Health and Human Services, which is like a newly created order of public health in Northampton. I know with our commissioner and some of my colleagues are really figuring out like how do we push like equity in pay further through the city to maybe create standards for other parts of our industry. So similarly to Amherst, we're trying to figure out how do we not ask for these professional credentials, which don't always equate to the best people, and really hire for people's experience, the way that they're able to relate to other people, and the years they put in, might even be someone in a service industry capacity who's really demonstrated they know how to talk to a wide range of people and, has been through their own struggles, rather than someone that has just finished their social work degree, right? Because there might not be a benefit to having that MSW if people don't actually have experience in the world, actually engaging with people in equitable ways. And I will share just to kind of shoehorn another question to our answer to some of the questions in the chat. We're also trying to work with a model that isn't using force and coercion within our team. I know there's a question about physical and medication restraint, and that's something that's really close to my heart. I don't want to see us get involved in that. And honestly, like, I'm still trying to figure out what space we have being in the city, given the liability here to kind of create an alternative response within public safety. So I'll get back to you, but that feels really important to me too, like stability within the city, but also paving another way that is going to be very different from our other public safety teams that do great work, but we're not trying to echo that, repeat that. So
Appreciate that, John. The phrase that's coming to my mind is like, your work is kind of internal innovation. You're within the city government, maybe borrowing some practices or some formats from other groups, but also trying to create a lot of new stuff, whole cloth, that maybe hasn't been done before. Appreciate that. Barbara, Stephanie, would love to hear from one of or both from you. We have some questions, I think, from the Q&A too about, can you just give us a little bit more info on maybe how HEART is distinct from the groups that Earl and Sean are leading, and how did your journey lead you to kind of putting HEART in the position that it's in as a more independent organization? Maybe Stephanie, we can hear from you first.
I was gonna check in with Barbara. Barbara, what do you think? Do you want to take a pass?
I think you can explain the history and the formation better. I can speak to the other points about restraint and all that.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, I know you have lots of things to say about the restraint and all the trainings and stuff you all have done around that. I should say that I'm not a responder. I haven't undergone the trainings that Barbara has. So I'm really excited for you all to have the perspective of a person who's going to work as a responder. So Cambridge HEART the process of developing Cambridge HEART was a community-led process. I should probably disclose that I myself am formerly undocumented. I have papers now. I also have a history of psychiatric confinement, and so I have like this work is really important for me. It's dear to my heart, and it's important that we change the existing system. Other members of our group are also immigrants and formerly undocumented, formerly incarcerated. Like, we represent the groups of people who have been underserved or unserved by existing systems of public safety and public health. And the process for developing Cambridge HEART was, how do we center the needs of those folks, and how do we create a program that will address those needs on their terms, and with their aims in mind. And we're not perfect at that. We're still working at trying to figure out how to do it properly, trying to keep people's safety in mind. So I should say, like, we're still actively working towards that. So our model intends to be a quasi non-governmental organization. We are housed in a separate 501c3, a nonprofit organization. Right now we're fiscally sponsored and we're working towards a full 501c3 for our organization. And so while we're building our 501c3, like our board and how for it to operate the way that we'd like it to operate, our programs are housed under an existing nonprofit community service care. And there's basically two key elements of the work that we're doing. One part of the work is designing what the program will look like. And what that means for us at this phase is that we have a series of working groups that are community directed. So we have like a mental health working group with doctors and lawyers and community members and people with lived experience who are having these types of conversations about, like, should we engage in the conversation about restraint? Like, what is the hard line? Are we going to call the police? When will we call the police? And so these are conversations that our community is having in our working group. We also have other working groups, including our domestic violence and sexual assault working group. And we're having really challenging conversations. And I'm sure Barbara can speak to this, but a lot of discussion and reading and training on how do we support people who are experiencing and have experienced domestic violence. Like, are we going to facilitate extraction? And what does that mean? And what does it look like? What resources are necessary? How are we facilitating warm handoffs to existing domestic violence and sexual assault working groups? What does that mean in a domestic space versus an institutional space like a hospital? So we're having these types of conversations like within our group, among the responders, definitely to like inform how we do it, as well as with current practitioners. So that's what, for us, a quasi non-governmental organization means. It means that we are building it separately from the government per se, with community input, with community resources. Definitely, we have no money from the government, you guys. So everything we're doing is coming from the community, and we're getting a lot of community support. That said, the other part of our work is definitely advocacy, and we foresee the advocacy portion of our work being very much long-term. That is not just currently advocating for the allocation of like monetary resources to continue this program, but also advocating for specific call allocations, so that as we learn more about the work that we're doing, so more responsibility can fall under our purview. And we're also currently advocating for a structure of oversight that holds us accountable, but in a very transparent and public way. So the two key portions of our work is like doing the work and how do we do it, as well as advocating for doing it. And it's a long-term process. I'll pass it to you, Barbara.
Thank you, Stephanie. Stephanie holds a lot of knowledge. I'm curious, which questions specifically would folks want first answered as a responder?
Do you want to talk about the de-escalation and restraint one? I think that's pretty.
Sure. Yes, so no, we are not restraining people, and we're not force medicating anybody. As a responders, we have been trained in de-escalation and also conversation strategies with folks when they're in crisis. So a lot of it is active listening. Ideally, we would have somebody that has similar lived experience with that person, so they can say, hey, so, I've experienced this, when this happened to me, I felt this, how are you feeling about it right now? Kind of try to engage the person in conversation. As I mentioned before, we're working separately from law enforcement, not showing up with law enforcement. We're not mandated reporters either. So because we recognize that there are certain populations that are just routinely hurt by that. And so we focus more on de-escalation, and we honor the person's autonomy to choose, like what care they want, what resources are you interested in. And we from our trainings, we have, as you know, Stephanie already shared some, like we have all these working groups backing us up. And we have the contacts and the networks that we're forming with our trainers backing us up so that we can say, so, you know, these people offer this, are you interested in this? But we're not forcing anybody to do anything. And we have time where some, you know, governmental agencies will show up and they have to go somewhere, they have to be somewhere, they have to get. We have the time to stay there with somebody until there is a point of either resolution or there's a plan made that the person is in charge of. We're not in charge of that. We're there as support. We're there to offer choices, not take away choices.
I just want to add here, we are mandated reporters. We take state funding. It is a requirement of state funding, but we absolutely are committed to not having a stick. So we absolutely wouldn't participate in restraint, chemical, physical, or vocal, which I don't think we talk enough about how much of restraint is presence in the way that people respond to things. But I just want to add, like, as we're considering this, that we not be naive at all about this, right? That in some way we are, there was a question about alternatives versus complementary. There is a sense that people want something that is markedly different. And some of that markedly different has to be not pretending like we can be everything to everyone all the time. If you want to know how we got into this bind with law enforcement, to some degree, it was governments and people asking them to take on every social ill while never transforming them from folks with guns. So, you know, we're pretty clear that, like, we'll do a lot of stuff, but there will be some things that we are ineffective in by the nature of, you know, like we'll show up to noise complaints and we'll leave if people tell us to leave. Does that mean a police response will happen? It may, but at least we gave it a shot. That's kind of where we are with it.
Appreciate
Yes.
it.
John, are you restraining people? You better say no now.
I would resign if that's where we're headed, and I'll put that on record. But yeah, and I guess I also want to talk about, like, oftentimes people, myself included, have felt at the edge of being restrained, or, you know, have been behind locked doors because I felt like I didn't have choices or options in the world. So I just want to, like, underscore what everybody's saying here. And I saw there was a longish question in the Q&A about, like, what about resources for houseless people and this and that, and, like, if all the money's going to salaries, then isn't that just some of the same old stuff? And I think it's a fair question. I also want to suggest that, you know, these teams we're not trying to solve everything in communities, right? And so, and I say that for two reasons. Like, one, just to underscore what Earl just said, I think I do question using the word alternative sometimes, because we're not necessarily trying to be an alternative to police, like, in the sense that I'm not trying to be a replacement for police, right? They're already doing their shit. They're doing their stuff. We're trying to do something different. And so when I think about that, is like, how can we not be more barriers to helping people get what they need? Or being, you know, with our way that we evaluate our success, like identifying holes in the system that are still there. So one of the things that our police and fire and other folks said to me during our first meeting is, like, you know, your team's not going to be like a 24-hour respite, right? And so, like, what are you going to do? And I was like, you know, that's true. I think we still have to keep fighting for systems change to have other resources, and all of us are doing that. And so one thing on my end, I wanted to share, I'm working with a group that's called the Community Resilience Hub in Northampton, which is held by a local nonprofit, but it is a city city initiative to create a unified place where people can have a drop-in center and also connect with various resources without those resources dominating that space. And so it's a really delicate thing, but I think there's some acknowledgement in Northampton and other places that there aren't enough places for people to go that are low barrier, that are no barrier, you know, where people can get basic hygiene needs met and maybe can have a big emotional experience, and there are people there to hold that, rather than, like, you know, call 911, or even now in our cities, you know, maybe when people call 911, there will be a different response, which is pretty amazing. I have this button near me that I just sat on in my car the other day. It says calling the cops on a person because they're in distress equals a threat of violence, and it has a no sign over 911. This comes from a past life of mine. but it just occurred to me, like, maybe people, at least in, Amherst, Northampton, like, could call 911 and get a different response actually than police if that's not the appropriate response. And so I guess I'll try to close it down, but I guess I want to suggest that sometimes when we get more focused in what we're doing rather than trying to attend to all these needs, is because for me, like, I don't want us to get wrapped up in the system of enforcement. Like we're kind of being focused maybe, so that we're not getting wrapped up in that. And that's why our scope is smaller in some respects. But I think we're also fighting for like safe consumption sites, for more housing first models, because we need that, right? And safe consumption sites are only a half measure for housing first, right? And so I think there's all these other things that I just want to fold into the conversation, as well as, bills that have passed to make, undocumented folks have more, like the bill to get driver's licenses for folks that are undocumented. So there's a lot of intersections with what we're doing, but we're not the panacea for all. And I think that's really important to name. But hopefully we won't, we'll provide these harm reduction moments where people aren't getting further channeled into the system, hopefully. And that's my hope.
Appreciate that insight, folks. What's striking me is that the variety of, for lack of a different word, flavors of responding to people in need might not necessarily be an either or situation. Maybe it's possible that there are needs for all of the different kinds of approaches that are represented here. Stephanie, I want to give you a chance to respond, and then I've got another question to pivot us afterwards.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Cameron. I just wanted to say one of the reasons why we have so much community support is that we don't intend to replace existing service providers. And we have a lot of service provider support because what we see our work as being, and we've worked very hard for this, is that we see ourselves as addressing or being present at the time of conflict and crisis. And then our work is facilitating warm handoffs. And one of the reasons why our training regimen is so long is because a lot of these organizations are training the responder on how to facilitate those warm handoffs. So we're not replacing existing service providers. We want to use them more effectively and more efficiently too. And part of what we're doing in terms of collecting data, we're still trying to find an institutional partner to support us with data analysis. But we knew from the beginning that we would need to collect some sort of data, and that we have a lot to say on data, but I'll pause there to say that who we hand people off to and when and how and which resources and which language, do you know what I mean? Do they need transportation? Those are some of the things that we're collecting data about, and we're connecting with our service provider partners about, and they are also helping to inform our procedures and our protocols for warm handoffs and for internal discussion and reporting. So I just wanted to name that as like a key thing. We see our intervention, if we're going to use that term. I have problems with that. I do participatory action research, but anyway, our intervention, so-called, is being there at the moment of conflict or crisis, and then working with strategic community service providers to facilitate warm handoffs and do long-term care. And then we have a longer vision going forward to have follow-up care, to do aftercare, to check in with folks like, hey, we connected you to this organization. Did you get what you needed? Like, do you need more? Can we support you with that? Should we connect you to another partner? And that's a key part of what we hope our work will be going forward.
Appreciate that, Stephanie. Yeah, that's so valuable to be, if not the service provider, the group that can get someone to the service that they need. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. Just
go for it, Barbara. Yeah,
quick blurb that as a responder going through the trainings, yeah, we knew we were going to be doing all these trainings around, so many issues. But one of the things that I didn't expect was the amount of community building and networking that has come from that. Because with each trainer and each like workshop or whatever that we do, we leave like with this really strong connection and commitment from them. Hey, So we're here for you. If you have someone who needs this, or if you need this, because we're in the community too, we have your back. And that's been really wonderful.
Thanks, Barbara. Appreciate that. A question that I imagine a lot of our audience has on their minds, and maybe one of the reasons they came tonight, is perhaps they're interested in trying to see some kind of alternative emergency response program, be it from a government body or an independent organization. Maybe folks are wanting to see the same kind of work that you're describing happen in their own community. What would you say to someone who wanted to try to get that going in their community? Are there some tangible steps they should be considering? Are there some questions they should be asking themselves first?
I would
Earl,
say
yeah, talk
the
to us.
community needs to have an honest conversation with itself about whether or not it actually wants to do this. Because let's be super honest, when after George Floyd was murdered and a black man was murdered and not much changed, a lot of communities started to have these conversations. And you see 3 represented here today. There's a reason for that. This isn't easy. Nobody wants to be called racist. Nobody wants to confront the reality that even if there are no racists in your police department, that the structure itself has racist roots. The people do not want to have the challenging conversations. They don't want to have the conversation about budget priorities. Do you prioritize this public safety? Do you prioritize it with your tax dollars? I think there are a lot of people in communities who would like to have all the reasons why this shouldn't happen. And there's a lot of those folks who I think I just saw a question in the chat that felt like really close to that, right? Around the resources in the community. Well, guess what? Those people who aren't getting those resources are Black and brown. They're the same folks struggling with these other systems. And to pretend that all of us together represent probably about $2 million. To pretend that we need to be responsible for the lack of housing in the Commonwealth, for the lack of federal support for that, for the fact that a rental voucher in this Commonwealth that at most is $1,400 doesn't get you an apartment almost anywhere anymore. Take those questions to the housing folks. Why haven't we adopted housing first as a state? Here's what I know. We are going to hold the line. We're going to do ethical work. And when we see issues, we're going to be vocal about them. But the more important piece, I think, for folks is that if your community is brave enough to have this conversation, they just might be brave enough to have the other ones too. So like part of our responsibility is to be change agents in this, right? I lived in Forest Park in Springfield, right? It's not just that the resources don't work, it's that they work exactly for the people they're supposed to work for. And they don't work for the people they were never intended to work for. And so I said this at the last one, and I guess I'll say it probably every time we get together, is I'm not interested in purity tests. And I don't think that these departments can survive being forced to answer to every social ill when they're really trying to figure out how to be effective at the beginning of that conversation.
This is Sean. Thank you, Earl, for that. I'll just add. I don't want to. Very much support what Earl just said. And creating these, programs, whether they're in the city or without the city, like it requires really hard reckoning conversations about race, about how social services are essentially coercive and based in force too. And that's a piece that I guess I want to elevate from Northampton. We had a really long 56 meeting Northampton Policing Review Commission where lots of community members showed up to talk about their experiences with policing. And it included, experiences with the police department, but it was also extended to social services too, and how not only were those supports not adequate, but oftentimes, there was policing embedded in those so-called supports too. And so I think, and that could, largely affect the folks that were already named, like Black folks, Indigenous folks, disabled folks, folks that are poor and included too. But one thing I guess I want to underscore is just, talk to the people who are already doing the work. You might be one of them. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of people working on mutual aid and support, a lot of people trying to support their own communities, whether those are trans asylum seekers or whether those are drug users, whether those are people that aren't being met by the current housing system. And so really look for the people who are already doing the work and try to come together and figure out like, how are they responding to that? I know so many great groups in Northampton that are, not resourced well enough because they're not part of the structures, but they're doing some of the most transformative work. And so that's something I would recommend in addition to what Earl just said is, look for the people that are already doing the work and figure out, why isn't that happening on a bigger scale, and can it? And so like, in addition to all those other pieces, I'd recommend that piece as well.
Appreciate that, Sean and Earl. Barbara, Stephanie, want to make space if you want to share a response to that question too. What steps would you recommend to someone, or questions that they should ask themselves if they want to try to support this kind of work in their community?
Well, first of all, it's not a short-term thing. I want to say that I thought I was going to be supporting a local thing for a little while in 2020. Be done anytime soon. So I just want to say this isn't something to enter into lightly. It's a lot of work. No matter which model we're talking about, it's a lot of work. I mean, I want to just echo and show support for Sean. This is so much work that I'm having to need a lot of the services that we're talking about for myself, right? And so I'm just saying, like, really, it takes a lot of investment. So first of all, get that straight. If you're ready to invest in something long term, then that's when you can start having these conversations. And I mean, I can speak to our process in the city, which is that we try to involve as many community members as possible and try to be as flexible as possible for understanding why certain types of people were not present in the different ways that we were asking people to show up. I mean, we're talking about undocumented people, and then we would hear our electeds saying things like, where are they? Well, okay, we're in City Hall, the police are here, like, why would they be here? It's Tuesday at 2 p.m. because that's when you're holding this meeting. And so we had to get some creative ways to get people's voices into the space. Conducting interviews with folks, getting audio recording, and then having other people transcribing those audio recordings and having other people read them, making sure that we anonymize and redact the key or identifying factors, letting people know not to speak the identifying factors. Don't tell us which neighborhood you're living in. Maybe not even say which country or language you're speaking, which country you're coming from, or which languages you speak. So we had to educate the community about how to participate in the process so that we kept them safe and protected their like very real threats. And so prioritizing those things, we also didn't pretend to have knowledge about like every type of person who needed support in the community. And so for us, it was really important to go to the communities that we wanted to engage with. And if we didn't know where they were, we went to organizations that serve those communities and we asked for support with who are they? How can we get involved? And then we had to earn trust from a lot of people, and we're still having to earn trust from a lot of people. Just naming that, like, it's not a short-term thing, and you have to constantly earn trust. And if you don't give people the time, and if you don't practice what you preach publicly, then you can lose trust. And so we're constantly playing that game of like, okay, we're making concessions to get this thing off the ground, but we have to be tactical in making sure that our local and community partners who support us and hold certain politics see the work that we're doing and see that we're not backtracking on what we're saying we're doing. And so it's a lot of work, and that communication is complicated and takes a lot of time. So there's just a lot of work that needs to be done in order to do this work, but it is rewarding, and every person that gets the support that they need from the work they're doing is getting this thing. And that's the reason why we're all here. That's why we're having this conversation.
That's really helpful, folks. Some of the things that I'm writing down as like questions to ask yourself if you're interested in supporting this kind of work. from Earl, if you're brave enough for this conversation, you should be brave enough for other conversations about why the people who need rights and resources aren't getting them. From Sean, look to the people who are already doing the work, and that work can look a lot of different ways. Shout outs to mutual aid organizations. From Stephanie, be prepared to do this for the long run. This is not a quick fix. This will not happen overnight. I appreciate it, Stephanie, your spotlight on, have a learning mindset, be prepared to earn trust and to learn from the communities themselves. Really appreciate that. We've got just a few minutes left, folks, before our 8:30 cutoff time. I'm going to try to synthesize, I think, a theme that I'm seeing in a bunch of questions from the chat. And what I think how I'll phrase the question is, I can imagine that to get to the places where you are all now in your work, you have encountered and have had to overcome various skeptical forces that showed up in a lot of different ways. I imagine too that you are still waging battles or even having to cooperate or work alongside people who are skeptical about the work you're trying to do. How do you make that work? What have you found helpful to either overcome that skepticism or to at least partner with individuals or organizations who remain skeptical?
I'll go first again. I don't care. I think for me, I've been pretty fortunate. I think you're going to hear folks talk about different relationships with everyone. Our police chief and fire chief were really clear that, you know, they see their world changing, and the opportunity was either to oppose it, and see what that gets you, or to be a part of that change. Our police chief's been there for 44 years. This is the police department he's worked in his whole career. You know, he came right out of high school. He's going to retire soon. Yeah, I think it's important to remember our cities and towns are pretty different size. We're about 35,000 folks. So I think the things people are skeptical about are the good things, right? What is this going to look like? What are you going to do? Are you going to overserve my community? Because, right, a community response that sits in the same neighborhoods that people already are worried about, the government putting eyes on them, isn't helpful. We're talking to folks and having those conversations, and we have that opportunity because there's 35,000 people that we can. I'll say the thing I've been saying to folks recently is it's not religion. It's going to happen in a month. So watch it. You know, we're really clear that we're not asking people to trust us. I think that's part of the problem from the beginning. We didn't do anything to deserve anybody's trust yet. It's on us to be trustworthy, to earn that from folks. And so, I think for the folks who are skeptical, they should be. And for the folks who believe in us, I appreciate it. And they should be skeptical too. And we're really clear, I think, to something Stephanie said that I really feel in my heart, is that we're asking for accountability all along the way, that we're telling folks the ways. I spent my first month really talking with folks about the scenarios in which they should fire me, because that felt important. So I don't know. But like everything else, I have a dog and a cat, and they believe in me. So when I have a day where not everybody does, I come home and close the doors. But I think nobody should feel forced to trust these ideas. If they think there's a better way to do it, the table's open. Glad to learn from you.
Stephanie, do you have any thoughts, or Barbara?
Well, as a responder, I came in at the quote unquote tail end of the development of HEART. And so like Stephanie shared a lot of like the history and how we came to be. And yes, and along the way, there are people who, for one reason or another, don't trust or question. And there some ways to deal with that. One of them is like, know what your values are and hold on to them, and practice. If you're new and if you're trying to start something in your community, you have to practice, stating what your values are and backing them up with the why. And you have to try to keep the lines of communication open. From the folks at the Tinglet Nation that they did circle process training with us, and there was talks about dealing with government officials, dealing with police, and he said, well, one of the guidelines that they gave was just try to see the humanity in the person you're having the conflict with or the rift with. Get a sense of who they are, and no matter how awful their politics are, and try to find a space in that humanity that you can appeal to. And it's an ongoing conversation. It's not going to be a one and done. It's going to be this thing that goes on and on. Like right now, we're dealing with like Cambridge City, Cambridge, certain processes. We're trying to partner with folks who have a similar mindset or that their values align with what they're doing, and they'll start coming out. The more you hold on to your values, the more you talk about why they're important and how it affects your community, these people will start actually coming out because they exist in these organizations. They're in there. And it's messy. It's never very neat. It's messy and it's an ongoing conversation. So those are two things that I've been using for myself and that I've seen.
I know, this is Sean. I know we're getting close to 8:30, we might be at it, but I just want to share something quick. So I've done peer support for most of my adult life. I've been a trainer for something called intentional peer support. And in that training, it's about non-coercive ways to connect with people and support them, like breaking down what help can mean, which is often coercive. We talk about these values of connection and understanding each other's worldviews, trying to find mutuality where we break the power down and move towards something we might not know exists yet. And that's often in the context of peer support, but I use those values when talking to the police chief, honestly, and people in different roles of power, where similar to what you said, Barbara, like it can be deeply uncomfortable, but I try to connect with someone, understand where people are coming from so that we can push to, move away from this power over system. And I've had some really bizarrely surprising conversations, hearing and actually almost like demanding vulnerability from people in power about what they're struggling with, what their fears are. And I just want to recognize that, like, I don't think I could just walk off the street into City Hall and do this. Like, I am now a department head. And so there's power there. And so it's interesting to think about like sometimes people in these roles have never been evaluated, in terms of what their efficacy is. And we have this moment to say, like, what are you struggling with? What's not working? It's really interesting. And on the flip side, I know that there are people in our community that might be really skeptical about what this is. One thing we're trying to do is work with an outside consultant to have focus groups that I hope will lead to, that we're paying people for too, that will hopefully lead to an advisory council long-term that can provide ongoing accountability from people with lived experience in our community. But honestly, I just try to be radically vulnerable, being like, you know what, I don't like what's happening right now, or this is making me uncomfortable. And sometimes just like interrupting the status quo with, what I'm feeling, honestly, in meetings that don't talk about feelings a lot, leads to some surprising places. And I think in a way, like, I think of our program as interrupting violence. I think of what a lot of other people are doing that. And so I try to model that as best I can with the various stakeholders, from people that are chiefs of departments to people I meet on the sidewalk. And it's a tough thing to kind of do, and I'm tired. But I think that I'm really glad to be doing this work alongside Stephanie and Barbara and Earl and other people in Massachusetts. As we are all in these different experiments, and I appreciate staying in contact as we figure out what's working, what's faltering, how we can adapt and change. So thanks for hosting this too.
Thanks all for your thoughts. Barbara, what you said about appealing to the humanity in others, I feel like you all have appealed to the humanity in us. Thanks for that reminder. Thanks for that check. Folks, that's all the time we have tonight. 3 quick thank yous before we let you go. Thanks to Robin for her background tech support. Appreciate you, Robin. Thanks to Our Revolution and DSA for sponsoring this forum. Biggest thanks for our panelists tonight. Barbara. Thanks to Sean. Appreciate you and the work that you're doing. Have a good night, everyone. Let's hit the ground running tomorrow morning. Take care. Be safe. Look out for one another.
And thank you, Cameron.